Have you ever been close to someone who feels almost impossible to understand? One moment they seem connected, attentive, and completely present, and the next they suddenly create distance. It can feel as though they have stepped into a private world where you cannot reach them, leaving you asking yourself, do they really care about me? But here is something important to understand. Someone with avoidant tendencies can appear distant on the outside, while thinking about you far more than they ever reveal. Sometimes, that very distance is connected to how strongly the relationship affects them. When a person struggles with closeness, their pattern can feel like an emotional game of coming closer and moving away. One day they are reaching out, talking to you, showing warmth, and making their presence known. Then, without much warning, they become quiet. From your side, that silence can feel deeply personal. You may assume you were rejected, that you said something wrong, or that their feelings were never genuine. But what happens inside them can be much more complicated. Their retreat is not always a sign that they stopped caring. Often, it is their way of handling feelings that suddenly become too intense. When closeness starts making them feel exposed, vulnerable, or overly dependent, their natural response may be to step back. Creating space gives them the feeling that they have regained control. But this is where things become interesting. When they eventually return, that return usually has a reason. If you meant nothing to them, there would be little motivation to reopen the connection. Their decision to come back can show that the bond remained active in their thoughts, even while they were creating distance. They may not send constant messages or offer dramatic reassurance, but returning after silence can communicate something in its own quiet way. It can mean that life without your presence did not feel as comfortable as they expected. Think about it like this. When something is always around, you can become accustomed to it. But once it disappears, its importance becomes much easier to recognize. Avoidant people sometimes create distance without fully realizing that the absence they created can make them feel the loss more strongly. So when their name suddenly appears on your screen again, it may not simply be boredom or convenience. It can be a sign that the connection has remained somewhere in their thoughts. Stay with me, because the next signs can reveal even more about what is happening beneath that silence. When they return, the inconsistency can make you question everything. You may think, if I truly mattered to them, why wouldn't they just stay? That question makes perfect sense from your perspective. But someone who fears emotional dependence may experience closeness differently. Their connection can happen in cycles. They move toward you, become uncomfortable with how much they feel, create distance, and then eventually feel drawn back again. Every return can represent an internal conflict. One side of them wants to protect their freedom and emotional independence. Another side still feels connected to you and does not want to lose that bond completely. When that second side brings them back, it tells you that the connection has had an effect on them. Pay attention to how they reconnect too. They may not suddenly appear with a dramatic confession. Instead, you might receive a simple, "Hey, how have you been?" Maybe they send a funny video, share a random thought, or ask about something you mentioned days earlier. It may look ordinary on the surface, almost too casual to mean anything. But for someone who normally protects themselves through distance, choosing to break the silence can carry more weight than it seems. They remembered you. They thought about reaching out. Then they actually acted on that thought. That decision matters. Their message is not automatically proof of deep love, of course, and it should always be judged alongside their consistency and behavior. But the fact that they keep reopening the door tells you the connection has not simply disappeared from their mind. Another revealing sign is what they remember. People often assume someone emotionally distant must also be emotionally unaware. That is not necessarily true. Many guarded people notice far more than they show. They may not respond with excitement in the moment. They may not immediately validate everything you say. They may even appear distracted. Yet later they can surprise you by remembering a tiny detail you thought they had completely forgotten. You might casually mention your favorite snack, an important meeting, a place you wanted to visit, or a story from your childhood. Then, weeks later, they bring it up naturally. Suddenly you realize they were listening. They simply did not show you how much they were taking in. This is one of the quieter ways someone can reveal that you have made an impression on them. A passing comment can disappear from most people's minds, but certain details remain when a person has attached meaning to the person who shared them. You may mention that you like a particular kind of coffee, and later they remember exactly how you take it. You could tell them about an important event happening on a certain day, and later they ask how it went. Maybe you once mentioned a teacher, a childhood memory, a favorite song, or a restaurant you wanted to try. Then, during a completely unrelated conversation, they bring it up again. That moment can catch you off guard, because their behavior earlier gave you no reason to believe they were paying attention. But some people process connection internally. They do not always react immediately, yet they quietly store what they hear. Their memory becomes a form of communication. Instead of saying, "You matter to me," they may demonstrate it by remembering your routines, preferences, plans, and little habits. For a guarded person, facts can feel easier to manage than emotions. Saying, "I really like you," may feel exposing, while remembering your schedule or favorite dessert feels safe. So their affection can appear through practical details rather than obvious declarations. You might be talking about dinner, and they suddenly suggest a place that serves something you once told them you loved. You may casually mention a difficult day, and later they check whether things improved. None of these moments alone proves what someone feels, but together they can reveal a pattern of attention, and attention is important. People do not usually remember every tiny detail about every person they meet. When someone repeatedly remembers the things connected to you, it can show that your presence has become mentally significant to them. They may still struggle with emotional expression. They may still retreat when things feel intense. But the details remain. Your words continue to exist in their memory, even when their behavior creates distance. That is why sometimes the smallest moments reveal more than the biggest statements. Keep watching, because the next sign is even harder for a guarded person to hide. Another powerful clue appears when their emotions escape before they have time to control them. Someone who values emotional distance may work hard to appear calm, independent, and unaffected. They may carefully choose their words. They may avoid obvious displays of affection. They may act as though nothing gets under their skin. But no matter how disciplined someone is, emotions can still reveal themselves through tiny reactions. A change in their voice, a sudden pause, a longer look than necessary, a shift in their body language, a flash of disappointment when you become distant. These moments can expose feelings that their words are trying to keep hidden. You may notice them looking at you when they think you are not paying attention. The glance lasts slightly longer. Their expression becomes softer. Then, the moment they realize you noticed, they quickly look away or return to their usual detached behavior. That change can be revealing because their natural reaction appeared before their defenses had time to take over. The same thing can happen when you pull back. They might pretend not to care, yet their mood changes. Their responses become shorter. They suddenly become more attentive. They may find a reason to start a conversation or appear near you without directly explaining why. Again, one reaction should never be treated as absolute proof of someone's feelings. People are complex. But repeated patterns deserve attention. When someone's behavior consistently changes around you, there may be an emotional response underneath the surface. Sometimes jealousy can appear in subtle ways too. They may casually ask who you were talking to, or suddenly become curious about your plans. They may pretend the answer does not matter, while clearly listening for every detail. They want information without wanting to admit why they want it. This is where their internal conflict becomes visible. They want connection, but they fear what connection requires from them. They want to know where they stand, yet they may hesitate to ask directly. They want reassurance, but they may struggle to request it. So their emotions come out indirectly. And when those unguarded moments happen repeatedly, they can tell you something important. Distance does not always mean absence of feeling. Sometimes distance is the strategy they use to manage feeling. The real question is not whether every distant person secretly cares deeply. The real question is whether their overall behavior shows a consistent pattern of connection, respect, effort, and emotional movement toward you. That is what matters most. Because someone thinking about you is one thing, Someone choosing to build something healthy with you is another, and that difference can change everything. They may try to appear completely unaffected when you take longer than usual to respond, but watch what happens afterward. If their messages suddenly become colder, shorter, or strangely irritated, that reaction may reveal more than their calm exterior ever could. It does not automatically mean they are deeply in love, but it can show that your behavior has an emotional effect on them. Sometimes the feeling comes out through humor. They might make a playful comment about you talking to someone else, tease you about another person, or make a sarcastic remark when they feel uncertain about where they stand. On the surface, it sounds like harmless banter. Underneath, however, there may be insecurity they do not know how to express directly. They probably will not say, "I am afraid of losing you." Instead, that fear may escape through a badly timed joke, a teasing question, or a sudden change in attitude. These tiny breaks in their emotional armor can give you a glimpse of what is happening beneath the surface. There can be a lot going on inside someone who has learned to protect themselves from emotional exposure. Their feelings may become intense, but their ability to communicate those feelings clearly may not match that intensity. Sometimes vulnerability appears when they least expect it. They might tell you more about their day than they normally would. They may reveal something that has been bothering them, mention a personal fear, or admit that something has been weighing on their mind. It may only last for a few sentences before they suddenly change the subject, but that brief opening still matters. It means their defenses lowered for a moment, and they allowed you to see something they usually keep private. Stay with me here, because these small moments can tell you much more than dramatic declarations ever could. Even irritation can sometimes reveal emotional investment, although it should never be confused with healthy communication. If someone genuinely feels nothing, they usually have little reason to react strongly to your actions. But when your behavior consistently changes their mood, it suggests that you occupy some emotional space in their world. Maybe they become noticeably quiet when you pull away. Maybe their tone changes when they feel ignored. Maybe they suddenly become more attentive after acting distant. These reactions can reveal a struggle between wanting connection and wanting protection. The most important part is what happens after the emotional slip. A guarded person may realize they showed too much and quickly retreat again. They might become embarrassed by the vulnerability, act casual, or pretend the moment never happened. That retreat does not erase what happened. The emotion was real in that moment, even if their response afterward became defensive. You can often see their feelings in the things they did not plan to reveal. A lingering look, a sudden change in tone, a joke that seems to contain a deeper question, a flash of frustration when you create distance, a moment of unusual openness followed by immediate withdrawal. These are the little cracks where their carefully controlled image becomes less convincing. But remember, patterns matter more than isolated incidents. One jealous joke does not prove anything. One nervous glance does not tell the whole story. What matters is repetition. If these reactions continue specifically around you, then you may be seeing a consistent emotional response. Someone can build a strong wall and still have feelings behind it. The wall changes how those feelings are expressed. It does not necessarily eliminate them. And sometimes the person who appears the most controlled is the one spending the most energy trying to stay controlled. Another revealing sign is the way their entire energy can change when you are around. Someone who usually keeps a calm, independent, and emotionally controlled image may behave very differently with you. Around other people, they seem relaxed, they talk normally, they appear confident and self-sufficient. They may give everyone the impression that they do not need much emotional reassurance from anyone. Then you arrive, and something shifts. It may be subtle, but you can feel the difference. Their posture changes, their voice changes. They become more playful, more nervous, more serious, or strangely quiet. The important thing is not whether they become warmer or colder. The important thing is that they become different. Maybe they suddenly become more aware of how they look or what they say. They may stumble over a sentence, laugh nervously, fidget with something in their hands, or become unusually careful with their words. With everyone else, they seem effortless. With you, they seem more conscious of themselves. That can happen when your opinion carries more weight for them than they want to admit. Their body may reveal an awareness that their words are trying to hide. Sometimes this shift appears through playful behavior. They tease you more. They look for reasons to start conversations. They become more animated when you are present. They may challenge you, joke with you, or create little moments of interaction that they do not create with everyone else. For someone who finds direct emotional expression uncomfortable, playfulness can become a safer path toward connection. They can create chemistry without having to openly admit that they want closeness. In other situations, the opposite happens. They become quieter around you. Their responses become more measured. They seem to be watching carefully before speaking. This can look like disinterest, but sometimes it is heightened awareness. They know the interaction matters, so they become cautious. They do not want to reveal too much. They are trying to maintain control while still being drawn toward you, and that contradiction can be fascinating to watch. You might notice that their behavior around you does not match the way they behave around everyone else. Friends may even notice it before you do. Someone might casually say, "They act differently when you're here." That difference can be one of the clearest clues that your presence affects them. Their subconscious reactions often appear before their conscious mind can organize them. Nervous laughter, sudden seriousness, unusual eye contact, playful teasing, or a strange quietness can all be signs of increased emotional awareness. Again, none of these behaviors should be treated as guaranteed proof of romantic feelings. Human behavior has many explanations, but when several of these patterns repeatedly appear around the same person, it becomes harder to dismiss the difference as meaningless. Pay attention to how they show up around you, not only to what they tell you. Their words may say, "Everything is fine," while their behavior says they are much more affected than they want to admit. That contrast is where the real story often lives. And there is another pattern that can be even more revealing: the subtle ways they test the connection. Someone who feels comfortable with vulnerability may simply ask, "Do you still care about me?" But a guarded person may find that question almost impossible to say out loud. It feels too exposing. It creates the possibility of rejection. It threatens the independence they have worked so hard to protect. So instead of asking directly for reassurance, they may create small situations to discover where they stand. These tests are not always conscious, and they should not automatically be labeled as manipulation. Often, they are protective habits developed around fear and uncertainty. One common test is silence. They may suddenly stop initiating conversations and wait to see what you do. They are not necessarily trying to punish you. They may be watching to see whether you notice their absence. Will you check in? Will you ask what happened? Will you make an effort to reconnect? In their mind, your response can answer a question they are too uncomfortable to ask directly. Do I still matter to you? If you reach out, they may feel reassured without ever having to admit that reassurance was what they wanted. Another test can appear through humor. They might casually mention someone else, tease you about dating, or ask a question that sounds playful but carries a little more emotional weight than expected. They are watching your reaction. If you respond warmly, they may relax. If you seem completely indifferent, their insecurity may become stronger, even if they never acknowledge it. You may also notice questions that seem random. What did you do this weekend? Who were you with? How have things been lately? The words sound ordinary, but the tone can make them feel different. They may be checking whether you are still emotionally engaged. They want information, but what they are really looking for is reassurance. They may want to know whether your attention has moved somewhere else. Sometimes the pattern becomes push and pull. They create distance and wait to see whether you follow. They challenge you during a conversation to see whether you remain patient. They become slightly unavailable and observe whether you make an effort. From the outside, it can look confusing. Beneath it, there may be fear. Fear that they will be abandoned. Fear that they will become too dependent. Fear that if they reveal how much they care, you will eventually hurt them. That is why these behaviors can be so contradictory. They want closeness, but they are also testing whether closeness is safe. When you understand the pattern, the behavior becomes easier to interpret, but it should not be used as an excuse for unhealthy treatment. Someone's fear may explain their behavior, but it does not make inconsistency, manipulation, disrespect, or emotional games acceptable. What matters is whether they gradually move toward healthier communication and genuine consistency. If they repeatedly test you, disappear, return, and leave you constantly confused, you deserve to look at the whole pattern rather than focusing only on the moments that make you hopeful. The strongest evidence is not simply that someone thinks about you. It is whether they eventually choose to communicate, show effort, respect your boundaries, and build trust. So if you have been wondering whether you remain in the mind of someone who often seems distant, do not search for one magical sign. Look at the pattern. Notice how they pull away and later find a reason to reconnect. Notice the tiny details they remember, even after acting as though they were not listening. Notice the emotions that escape when their guard drops. Notice how their energy changes specifically when you enter the room. Notice the subtle questions, jokes, pauses, and little attempts to discover whether the connection is still there. These behaviors can reveal that the relationship has emotional significance to them, even if they struggle to communicate that significance directly. But remember something equally important. Being on someone's mind is not the same as being properly loved. Someone can miss you and still be unable to give you what you need. Someone can care and still behave inconsistently. Someone can fear losing you and still need to learn how to show up in a healthier way. So watch the signs, but watch the actions even more closely. Because the clearest answer is not hidden in their silence. It is revealed in what they consistently choose to do when they have the opportunity to come closer.